Looking back on Rugrats as a show, keeping in mind its original 13-year run and pretending that the 2021 reboot never happened, I feel like a lot of us break it into two categories. You might use different words, but in my interpretation, there's the OG Rugrats that felt charmingly unpolished, emphasizing the hand-drawn aspect, and just overall with its very muted and soft color palette, invoked kind of a calming and chill feeling. Then there's the episodes after Rugrats in Paris. What some might still to this day call new Rugrats, even though the change was all the way back in 2001. The new animation style felt very bright and modernized to fit in with the rest of the shows airing on Nickelodeon at the time. Along with the new animation style, it felt like a bit of a sacrifice of that, for lack of a better word, almost experimental and oddball feeling that the show had in its early years. To put it plain as day, we kind of break it down to this Rugrats and that Rugrats. For me, what really made me recognize this as a kid was the theme song and intro sequence changing. For a decade, we'd see this intro sequence and know exactly what we were in for. Then, in 2001, we would see the old school intro dropped and replaced with a new sequence featuring all of the new characters added in over the last 10 years, as well as an updated song that definitely felt like a step into the future compared to the old theme song. On top of that, instead of wired phones and the classic playpen, the sequence would feature a remote control airplane as well as a mechanical reptar that makes noise when knocked over. It was clear in 2001 that the show really wanted to go in a bit of a more modern direction, and as a result, things would change. In all reality though, this change, as jarring as it was, could certainly be seen as a good thing. I mean, nothing can ever stay the same in life, especially media, and more specifically, cartoons. Cartoons have to stay relevant and interesting to keep getting renewed by their network and for the production team to continue getting their funding. On that note, we can't really blame a show for changing to begin with. What's important though is how those changes affect the overall quality of life of the show. As far as Rugrats is concerned, I'm gonna plant my feet in the ground and say that the way the show changed across its original 13-year run was a good thing in general. I mean, if we go all the way back to 1999, after Dill was added to the show, but 2 entire years before Rugrats in Paris and the intro theme change, it just felt a little odd seeing this intro here, which was drawn in 1991, transition to this immediately after. Granted, it was an amazing testimony of how far animation had come in just 6 years since the show had premiered. I'm sure we can all agree that it was time for at least a bit of a change to the intro sequence. With that being said though, sure, the animation changed, and the theme song changed, and a lot of these oddball moments and surreal character designs featuring exaggerated proportions had changed as well, instead reaching for a rather traditional modern cartoon approach. But all of those things really are subjective. We're all gonna have differing opinions on the animation style and things like that, but one thing I'm sure that a lot of people can agree on being a positive is how Rugrats changed their approach to inclusivity and representation. From the start, Rugrats has always been really big on representation. It's a show that, due to its nature of being rooted in real life and focused around actual humans and not talking animals or mythical creatures, had an amazing opportunity to portray real-life situations in a very relatable way. We would see portrayals of single parents, parents to twins, only children, families with a ton of children, and outside of the family structure. We would also see portrayals of diversity, breaking stereotypes both within gender and race, portrayals of life with a disability, portrayals of being a parent to a preemie, and really just so much more. Rugrats as a show is one that I feel like is actively responsible to a degree for a lot of people who grew up watching it feeling safe to explore who they are and what they like without having to hold on so desperately to that fear of what everyone else will think. It's a big part of why so many of us in the generations who grew up watching it at a very young age tend to be more inclusive and mindful of others, often taking the time to empathize with someone else's point of view rather than immediately shoving yours down their throat. Of course, that's not always the case, as I'm sure there are quite a few people who grew up watching this that are the exact opposite of what I just described. But still, I like to hope that growing up with shows like Rugrats had an overall positive effect on the future of society. I feel like growing up watching this made a lot of us realize that the positivity and inclusivity that a lot of us wanted to see in the world starts with us. It's up to young generations to break the mold and improve society as we move onward towards the future. As far as Rugrats is concerned, I truly appreciate them for utilizing their opportunity to spread these positive messages in a mindful and impactful way. As the show would progress and change, of course, so did the representation. We would go from seeing characters like Lil DeVille breaking gender norms that were very prevalent at the time, especially in cartoons, to seeing the addition of Kimi Watanabe Finster as well as her mother Kira, which would include a look into her Japanese heritage, moving to the United States, and including their new family and their heritage as well. As the show changed and aged, it would continue to promote tolerance and acceptance. One big part of that was none other than Susie Carmichael and her family. In season 2, we would see Susie introduced to the cast, and she would take on the role of kind of a protector of the babies at times, serving as both a friend, but also at times an opposite to Angelica. She would challenge Angelica and stand up for the babies, but on top of that, she would also challenge many of the norms that were consistent across many different shows at the time. She's a character that would go against the grain when she needed to in the name of right versus wrong, and that is a truly important role to have in a show like this. A lot of times, Susie serves as the active voice of reason. She's an amazing character, and I absolutely loved how over the course of 13 years, Rugrats would again and again break the mold, building Susie up as a character in the process. And that's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna look at a later episode of Rugrats that perfectly portrays the exact feeling that I'm talking about here. A holiday special that absolutely broke the mold and was one of the first of its kind for mainstream television. However, as much as the episode would get positive critical acclaim for the most part, it would still end up being quite the double-edged sword, garnering some negative criticism and some controversy along the way, admittedly for a very valid reason. This episode would find itself approaching with fantastic intentions. However, those intentions would come under question on the heels of a decade rampant with commercialism and profiting on others. The way the dominoes fall, and where the blame falls in the long run though, might come as a shock to you. Before we dive into it though, I want to thank you so much for clicking on this video and for being a part of my YouTube journey. Just you being here in the first place means the world to me, and your eyes seeing this video helps me and my family tremendously. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for helping me reach for my dreams. I feel incredibly lucky to have the audience that I have here on YouTube, and I want you to know that if your eyes are seeing this, or if your ears are hearing this, you are important. You're important to me. You make a difference in this world, and it's a better place because you're in it. Don't ever forget that. If you end up having a sec, please let me know in the comments what you think about this video, and I'll do my best to respond to it. If you enjoy the video, make sure to drop a like, and heads up, I just recently launched YouTube memberships. If you'd like to support me, my family, and my future projects directly, a membership is an excellent way to do it. No pressure, and of course, make sure you put yourself and your family first. You being taken care of and having a roof over your head is far more important than financially supporting any artist on any platform. But again, if you'd like to show some support and get some cool perks along the way, please consider becoming a member. Thanks so much for being here, and I hope you have an amazing day, my friend. Today, we're gonna deep dive into the Season 7 episode, A Rugrats Kwanzaa. This episode starts out on a dark and stormy night where we see rainfall pouring down on the Rugrats neighborhood. We close in on the house of the Carmichael family, where their family Christmas celebration is in full swing. All of the presents under the tree have been ripped open in excitement, and all of the kids are enjoying their gifts. Edwin is doing an experiment with his new chemistry set, Buster is kicking around his new ball, and Elisa is talking on her new cell phone. Meanwhile, little Susie is enjoying her new hair salon playset, having a blast giving all of her dolls new hairstyles.
Edwin, I'm out of customers. Would you like to come to my new beauty salon?
Not now, Susie. I'm on the verge of a scientific breakthrough. I may have discovered the cure for hiccups.
Susie then asks Buster, but he declines, saying that his hair is off limits until soccer finals. And of course, Elisa isn't willing to let Susie mess her hair up. Feeling defeated, Susie sits there in front of her hair salon set, sad that nobody will let her do their hair. Buster comes up saying that their great Aunt T will be there soon, and maybe she'll let Susie do her hair, but Elisa chimes in saying that she's an 86-year-old woman, thinking that she won't really be up to it. Just then, their conversation is interrupted by the sound of the front door swinging open.
Woo-wee! Oh my, I haven't seen a storm like this since Hurricane Coco in Tahiti.
Susie, what's the matter?
Your Aunt T's here. Baby girl, it's so good to see you.
Aunt T explains that her husband Charles was a little too slow at the airport and he got stuck in Zanzibar, so it's just going to be her visiting until he catches the next flight out. She doesn't let that spoil her positive mood though, as she's so excited to meet all of the youngest members of her family who she's heard so much about.
You may not know me, but I know you. Elisa, Edwin, Buster, and Susie, the baby of the family.
I'm not a baby. I'm 3.5.
Child, at my age, everyone's a baby.
Aunt T gives all the kids a big old hug as Edwin comments on how, for an 86-year-old woman, she has the grip of a python. She tells them all about how happy she is to see them and how she's got a feeling that they're going to have an extra special Kwanzaa this year. However, all of the kids, save for Edwin, are confused and have never heard of Kwanzaa.
You know, we never really observed that holiday, Aunt T.
Although I did write an excellent paper on it several years ago.
Is that right, son? Well, then you know Kwanzaa's all about being together as a family. And since we're all together, we've got to celebrate.
Well, if that's what you want, that's what we'll do. It'll be fun, won't it, kids?
Are you gotta be kidding me? Better things to do.
Buster and Elisa are less than enthused. Meanwhile, Susie is still super confused about what Kwanzaa even is. Edwin tries to explain its history of being established in the 60s as a commemoration of the first harvest celebrations in Africa, but of course, this just leaves Susie more confused than ever. Aunt T puts it simple for Susie, saying that all she needs to know is that it's a time to be thankful and honor the legacy of their great people. After having Buster help her pull off her boots, Lucy suggests that her and Aunt T go find Randy, saying that he's so excited to see her.
Oh, fine idea. He's not still writing stories about those crummy bears, is he?
Dummy bears, Aunt T. Yes, he is.
Thanks for inviting us over for Kwanzaa, Susie. Sure, Chucky. Okay, you're all finished. Gosh, we look like brother and sister, except you don't got as many freckles.
As Chucky and Susie play together, we see Kimmy and Tommy dancing around with Aunt T as she plays a drum, encouraging them to let the music flow through them. As the celebration continues, Tommy stops and asks if maybe he can have his hair styled like Chucky's. But due to his lack of hair, Susie says it might have to wait for next year. Just then, we see Randy walk into the living room, saying that he's really struggling with his script due to Aunt T's loud music and dancing.
Hen feathers, Randy. I didn't know your family had so many trophies. Looks like I've stumbled into the Carmichael Hall of Fame. And you, Randy, the Clinkers Award for Comedy. You know, I'd never guessed you were a funny man. Well, there's certainly a lot of great people in this family.
Upon hearing that conversation, Kimmy asks which of the trophies are Susie's, but when she realizes that none of them are hers, Susie starts to feel like she isn't as great as everybody else in her family. While Susie struggles with that internal crisis, we cut back over to Aunt T, who's telling Randy about how proud she is of him and his family. She suggests that even though they're traditionally supposed to wait until the 6th day of Kwanzaa for the Karamu, the celebratory communal feast, they just do it tonight instead. However, Randy declines her offer.
Sorry, Aunt T, but I've only got 2 days to write a script, so if you'll excuse me...
Hey, where are you going? The first day of Kwanzaa is about unity. We're supposed to be together.
Later on, we see all of the kids hanging out in the living room when Aunt T approaches, speaking to them in Swahili and pulling out her suitcase to give them gifts that she brought them for Kwanzaa. She gives Elisa a handmade container, saying it's something for her dance coming up. She gives Edwin a wrapped present, saying that it's a prop to go with his research paper. And she tosses a drawstring bag over to Buster, wishing that his descendants are as plentiful. Lastly, she grabs one final wrapped present and walks it over to Susie, saying that while Susie shares that with her friends, she's gonna go find Lucy to tell her that they're having a feast tonight. Susie excitedly rips the wrapping paper off, hoping for something that they can all play with right now. But she ends up being really disappointed when she finds that her gift is a book full of really old pictures.
Wow, look at all the neat stuff they got.
That is so not going on my head.
28, 30, 80. Shh, I'm counting my descendants. How am I supposed to feed all these kids?
Just then, the doorbell rings, and Lucy answers it to find the DeVille family arriving so Phil and Lil can play with their friends. Betty apologizes for being so late, saying that Howard got a little carried away building his ship in a bottle. On that note, she says they're on their way to the hospital right now to get the bottle off of his hand, and considering that Lucy is a doctor at that same hospital, they invite her to tag along. She puts on her coat and heads out without even telling anyone, while Phil and Lil go to greet their friends. They are blown away by the awesome Kwanzaa presents that Buster and Elisa got, but much like Susie, they're not all too enthused about the book full of pictures. As the babies continue to play, Aunt T approaches and starts delegating tasks to everyone in preparation for the Karamu this evening, starting by putting Buster of all people in charge of cooking dinner.
I've got a recipe for African peanut butter stew that'll knock your socks off.
Don't even go there. She what?
Elisa, you can set the table. Don't forget the mohindi, the mkeka, and the mazao.
Excuse me?
That's corn, straw mat, and the fruits of the harvest.
Edwin, you gather the kanara and the candles. Come on, everybody, let's get cracking.
As everyone breaks to start their part of preparing, Susie ends up feeling overlooked, saying that she wants to help prepare too, but not being able to get Aunt T's attention to tell her. Elisa says that she's lucky for not having to help, but poor Susie is genuinely really hurt about being left out.
I think I know why Aunt T didn't give me a job for Kwanzaa. You do? Why, Susie? She said Kwanzaa's about being together and celebrating great peoples, and I'm not great. Don't be silly. You're one of the greatest peoples I know. No, I'm not.
Of course you are.
Susie says that she doesn't have a trophy like everyone else in her family, so she can't be great. The babies decide that they're gonna make her a trophy, but Susie says that they can't just make one because she has to do something worthy of being given a trophy first. When Susie tells the baby that her sister Elisa got a trophy for being class president, Tommy points out that she would make an excellent president.
What's a president do again?
They give speeches and smile when they get their pictures taken and things like that. And on my summer vacation, my family went to the zoo. We saw lots of animals. There were lions and giraffes and gorillas.
Show's over, Shrimp.
After that, we see Susie with multiple different soaps and beauty products attempting a chemistry project, but sadly she just ends up making a huge mess of herself. After that, we see her with Buster's soccer ball when she falls and ends up popping the ball in the process, leaving her feeling like she's never gonna be able to do anything great. The babies tell her that she's great at a lot of stuff, and they suggest that maybe she should try to do her own great thing instead of trying to do the same thing that someone else already did.
Like what?
Well, you're good at making stuff.
You're right, Chucky. Maybe I'll make Auntie a Kwanzaa gift.
Gee, that's a real nice ball, Susie.
I thought it was a turtle.
Susie explains to them that she's making a bust of her own head, like the one that her brother Edwin has on his piano. She continues to spin and mold her bust happily until the pottery wheel starts spinning out of control, causing her art to go flying all over the place and make a big mess, ruining her plan and leaving her completely devastated.
I guess my family's just gonna have to celebrate Kwanzaa without me. I'm not one of my great people.
Bless your heart, child. What's the matter?
I ruined the present I made you for Kwanzaa. I'm sorry, Auntie.
Aunt T tells Susie that her present has a lot of character, just like she does. However, she can still tell that Susie is really upset, so she asks her what else is on her mind right now.
I can't celebrate Kwanzaa with you because it's for the great peoples, and I'm not great because I don't got any trophies or awards like you and all the rest of my family.
Me? A trophy? Whew. The only award I ever got is one your Uncle Charles gave me for biggest mouth in town.
Aunt T looks Susie right in the eyes, and she tells her that greatness doesn't have anything to do with winning awards. She gives Susie a big kiss on the forehead, wipes the tears from her eyes and the clay from her face, as she helps Susie up and brings all of the kids out with her so that she can show them something really important. The group all heads downstairs, and out of the blue, lightning strikes again, and all of the power in the house goes out, leaving the babies scared in the dark. Aunt T lights some candles as Randy comes to check on everyone.
Is everyone okay?
We're just fine. Sit down, Randy. Enjoy some family time.
I could use a break. I just wrote a scene where the Dummy Bears pitch a tent on their camping trip. It was hilarious.
Just goes to show you how people find different things funny.
Aunt T asks Susie to get the present that she gave her for Kwanzaa, and Susie pulls it out from under the coffee table. Aunt T says that she's been keeping up on this book for over 50 years, and that it's full of more great people than you could ever imagine.
Wow, there's Rosa Parks, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall.
Don't forget Ella Fitzgerald. Baba-doo-dee, dabba-doo-doo. Boy, that lady could scat. But I don't want you children thinking that all great people become famous and get their pictures in the paper. Most never do.
As Aunt T is teaching the kids a very important life lesson, one specific picture catches Susie's eye. Aunt T explains that's a picture of none other than her husband, Charles. She says that he's a very great man, and even though he doesn't have any awards, he's one of the kindest people that she's ever met. As she's explaining how he would help anybody who needs it, we cut to a flashback all the way to the summer of 1963. Charles is driving through the countryside with Aunt T while they're listening to the radio. They hear a news reporter talking about how a massive crowd is beginning to form at the nation's capital as people prepare for the civil rights demonstration led by none other than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Heavens to Gimbal, Charles. We're miles from Washington, and you promised we'd see Dr. King. You and your wrong turns.
Uh-oh, looks like car trouble.
The two pull over, and we see Charles under the car helping this motorist with his troubles. Aunt T sees the driver's fancy suit covered in oil and asks where he's headed to in such fine clothes, to which the man says that he's on his way to deliver a speech. She says there's no way that this man can give a speech covered in oil, so she goes over to their car to get one of Charles's clean shirts for him to wear. The two men get out from under the car, having fixed the leak, when Aunt T approaches with the clean shirt.
Should be okay to drive now. Thank you, sir.
You know, son, I never did get your name.
It's Martin Luther King, ma'am.
Way to go, Uncle Charles.
As they continue to go through the book, Susie is shocked to see what she thinks is a picture of herself in there, but lo and behold, we find out it's actually her mother Lucy on the day that she sang her very first solo in the church choir. Right at that exact time, Lucy walks right through the door, having returned from the hospital just in time to hear the story. We cut to a flashback of Lucy as a little girl, not much older than Susie is now, as she's in one of the back rooms off of the stage at church. She peeks through the curtain and sees just how many people are out there waiting for her, and she gets really nervous, saying that she can't do it. Her mom comes in to check on her, and she tells her mom that she isn't ready for her solo, saying that she has a frog in her throat. Her mom gives her a really important pep talk, telling her that it's just a little bit of stage fright. She reminds Lucy that she loves singing in the choir, and that she should never let fear keep her from doing what she loves. Just like that, we cut right to the stage where Lucy is about to start singing for everyone.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Hallelujah. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine.
The stage lights up with joy as the entire choir joins in on the song, and Lucy's light shines brighter than ever while the whole crowd watches with pride. We then cut back to the present day, where Susie asks her mom how she was able to overcome being so afraid. Both Lucy and Aunt T explain that even great people get scared sometimes, but the difference is they don't let it stop them.
Speaking of great people, you've forgotten to mention one of the greatest people of all, Aunt T.
Who's that, child?
You.
We then get a flashback to when Lucy was a young adult, sitting on her bed with a really sad and defeated look on her face. Aunt T comes through the door excitedly and asks her why she isn't packing, saying that it's not every day that a gal gets accepted into Harvard Medical School. Lucy explains to her through tears that her financial aid fell through and that she has no idea how she's going to be able to afford going to school.
Family needs a little help, and no one thinks to ask me. Why, what in blazes have your Uncle Charles and I been working so hard for if not to help family when they need it? Mwah. Baby, I know you'll make a fine doctor someday.
Oh, thank you, Auntie.
From there, we cut to the day that this picture was taken, at Lucy's graduation with none other than Aunt T by her side. Back in the present day, The family all sits in the living room, feeling really thankful for one another, right as the power clicks back on.
Ladies and gentlemen, our Kwanzaa dinner is served. When the power went out, I couldn't make the African peanut butter stew, so I decided to make African peanut butter sandwiches instead.
Genius, my boy.
Elisa comes in saying that the table is all set for their karamu, so the whole family starts to get up and file on towards the kitchen to celebrate their unity. As everyone leaves, Aunt T pulls Susie aside to tell her something really important.
Child, always be proud of who you are and where you came from. And remember, you have your whole life to discover how great you really are. Now, let's go celebrate with the rest of the family. You can light the candle on the Kanara.
Umoja, Auntie.
Umoja, baby.
As Aunt T heads towards the kitchen, Susie's friends tell her how lucky she is to have such an amazing book full of so many important stories and pictures. They tell her that she really does have such a great family and that in their eyes, she's the greatest of them all. She thanks them, and just like that, they all happily run towards the kitchen to celebrate Kwanzaa together. As they enter the kitchen, we hear the doorbell ring, and Aunt T goes to answer it.
Hello, Dumpling.
Oh, Charles, you made it. Now we're all together. Come on now. We're just about to sit down for the feast.
We cut on over to the dinner table where we hear everyone talking about how amazing the peanut butter sandwiches are, telling Buster that George Washington Carver himself would be proud. Lucy stands up, thanking them all for being here, and of course Aunt T and Uncle Charles for bringing them all together and reminding them of everything that they have to be grateful for.
Susie, would you like to make the unity toast?
Goodness, child, you can't make the toast without a cup of unity. And I know just the thing.
To Aunt T for showing us we can all be great peoples.
Harambe!
Harambe!
Now, like we talked about earlier, this episode was one of the very first mainstream TV shows to showcase Kwanzaa and highlight what it's all about. It's evident from what we just watched that when Klasky Chupo approached this episode, they through and through did so in a respectful way that focused on the core values of Kwanzaa, and of course portraying that in a way that wasn't so blatantly focused on being a history lesson per se. Of course, we're talking about a long-standing cartoon focusing on characters that we already have an established rapport built with, so with that in mind, this episode took a fantastic approach of giving us some history and context, but also showing us the values of Kwanzaa through the actions in this episode instead of just listing them for us as if this were some kind of school lesson. All things considered, this would be a tale that revolves heavily around Susie's insecurities, and it would use that as a valid and relatable plot point to convey the true meaning of Kwanzaa. It's a bold and effective strategy to give the audience something to latch onto that they can relate to on a personal level, and as a result, the values that they're trying to convey would come across more firmly. Now, before we dig into just why this episode would find itself knee-deep in criticism, I certainly want to talk about some of the praise that this one got. First of all, this episode would get a ton of praise for being very culturally accurate. From the Swahili verbiage used throughout this one, down to the gifts given, they put a strong emphasis on making sure that they portrayed a traditional Kwanzaa as accurately as they could within the time slot that they were given, and in my opinion, they did an excellent job both at face value and looking further into the context given. I, for one, think that's really important, keeping in mind that they only have about 20 minutes to tell this story. At face value, they told us they were celebrating day 1 of Kwanzaa and having their early Karamu, which usually takes place on the 6th day of Kwanzaa, We see this when Aunt T comes up to the kids and says Habari Gani, which is the greeting for each day of Kwanzaa, having a different answer for every day. Day 1, like Aunt T told the kids, is Umoja, which means unity. The principle traditionally focused on day 1 is to strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race. Of course, the family changing the day of their karamu to fit what works best for them is an excellent example of how everyone celebrates differently. The point isn't that you do it exactly as it was first done when the tradition started. The point is celebrating African culture, reaffirming traditional African values, fostering that sense of unity, and embracing the 7 principles of Kwanzaa as guidance along the way. Again, at face value, this episode of Rugrats, specifically Aunt T, told us that we were just seeing day 1 and the karamu, but in all reality, throughout the entirety of this episode, we would actually get a sense of what all 7 days worth of principles are about. Day 1 is embodied in this episode through and through. The sense of unity and togetherness is shown plain as day through the family, obviously being there with one another, but a big part of that umoja is acts of kindness which can better the community as a whole. One of the biggest examples of this is embodied in that story that Aunt T told about Charles and her stopping on their way to Washington to help a stranded motorist. Of course, more on that later because I don't want to get sidetracked from the point that we're discussing here. But that was a perfect example of umoja. Charles didn't think for a second about stopping to help when he saw that someone was in need. Little did he know that one seemingly minor act would have a bigger effect on the entire African American community than he could have ever imagined. From there, Day 2 focuses on the principle of kujichagulia, or self-determination, encouraging the belief that African American people should proudly define, defend, and develop themselves instead of allowing or encouraging others to do it. Answering the question of, who am I? And not allowing anyone else to answer that question on your behalf. This right here is plain as day conveyed in all of Aunt T's actions towards Susie. Susie is asking that exact question. Who am I? Feeling like she isn't good enough for not winning any awards. Aunt T embraced Susie to determine that for herself, however. She told her that awards given by other people do not quantify the worth of a person or how great they are. Day 3 focuses on ujima, or collective work and responsibility, building and maintaining the community together and problem solving as a collaborative effort, being willing to make the rest of the community's problem your problem, in hopes of building up the people as a whole. This principle shines bright in that moment where Aunt T brings everyone together to help prepare for the karamu. Everyone had their own piece of the puzzle to put together and their own share of work to take care of, with the ultimate end goal of bringing them all together around the table as one. Now, Day 4 focuses on the principle of Ujamaa, or cooperative economics. At face value, this principle embodies the African community building and maintaining their own stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit from them together. One could directly correlate this with the gifts that Aunt T gave to 3 of the 4 children. This is a great one because it also falls in line with the accuracy of this episode, considering that in traditional Kwanzaa gift giving, it's customary for the gift to be something handmade and a meaningful symbol of African heritage that usually falls in line with these 7 principles. They may not have been handmade by Aunt T herself, but regardless, the gifts that she gave checked those boxes, and it definitely represents the care and research done when approaching this episode. It goes without saying that Aunt T, embracing the principles of Kwanzaa, definitely acquired these from an African-owned store, potentially even one of the historical markets of Stonetown, considering that she said her and Uncle Charles were flying in from Zanzibar. Another way that we could look at this is that moment where Aunt T generously pays for Lucy's college tuition in the flashback. It may not tie directly into shops and businesses, but it is nevertheless an excellent example of sharing the wealth for the sake of bettering the community. Sure, you could see Auntie sharing the wealth as simple as an aunt helping her niece, because that's what it is, of course, but as it relates to capturing the principle of Ujamaa, I feel like that moment played a key part. One other way you could potentially look at this, though, could also be, like the last principle, the collective work that they all put into the meal, with the ultimate outcome of being able to share in the wealth of the feast. A big part of this principle is everyone putting in the work and all getting to enjoy the fruits of labor with one another, sharing the joyous moment. The process of them preparing for and enjoying the karamu as a family embodies this pretty excellently. Day 5 would focus on the principle of Nia, or purpose. The community coming together and making it their collective vocation to focus on building and developing the community in order to restore the traditional greatness of their people. This is a time of talking about personal and community goals and taking the time to consider in which ways your own individual goals can have a greater effect on the collective as an entirety. This one can be a little tricky to spot in this episode, but I feel like, in a sense, it rings true in a few ways. First of all, we see this embodied in the way that all of the kids seemed really uninterested in Kwanzaa and even more uninterested in helping out for the greater good of everyone in the room. At first, when Aunt T was delegating tasks to the kids, they were all very unhappy to have to help. But by the end, we see them all proud of the work that they did and happily enjoying a prosperous moment with their family. This symbolizes them recognizing the importance of taking steps to help out the community and not just yourself. Of course, the basic human need to prioritize yourself is important, but this serves as not only a reminder to always consider how you could help out for the greater good, but also how great it feels to enjoy the fruits of your labor together as a community. Furthermore, I feel like this one could be seen in Randy's behavior to a degree. At first, Randy sees Aunt T and the kids dancing to the music and celebrating, and he seems less than enthused about Kwanzaa. He dismisses the idea of having their karamu early and almost seems as if he doesn't really like Aunt T very much. On the day that's supposed to be about unity, he's more focused on hiding away in his office and working on his script. Of course, the man's gotta work, and I can't fault him for that, but still, I feel like him going from having this almost sour attitude about Kwanzaa and Aunt T to happily asking Susie if she'd like to lead the libation ceremony with the Unity Cup at the end, to a degree represents him recognizing the importance of being an active part of his community. Day 6 would focus on Kuumba, or creativity. This is meant to stress the importance of artistic expression and how it can be used to leave the community a better and more beautiful place than it was when you were born into it. It's typically a day of celebration, as this is traditionally when the Kamaru would happen. It's a day where many take time to embrace artistic expression in the form of music, dance, storytelling, or wherever the art leads you. Of course, all the meanwhile reflecting on the ways that you can contribute to your community. What's interesting is that there's likely multiple examples that you could draw from here, but the first one that I thought of was a really short one. This scene right here, where we see Susie doing Chucky's hair, which I'm certainly going to circle back to later, and Aunt T dances by with Kimmy and Tommy as she's playfully drumming on a drum, and the bunch are all embracing the music. This right here brought me so much joy, even though it was a very short-lived scene. I feel like this is an excellent snapshot of what embodies that principle. And last, but certainly not least, is Day 7, which would focus on the principle of Imani, or faith. I think the official Kwanzaa website puts it best. It's defined to believe with all our heart in our people, our parents, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. This right here is a commitment to culture and the community as a whole. This principle is applied on January 1st, and in my eyes, it symbolizes looking back on all of the values that have been prioritized and reflected on over the last week and making the commitment to live by them all year round, not just during the week of Kwanzaa. It's a mindset that's meant to bring things full circle. It started out with unity. Without that unity and coming together, the community couldn't have ever begun to grow. However, with the addition of strength, commitment, and most of all, faith, this growth has a huge propensity to thrive more than ever. This principle rests perfectly as the crown jewel upon this ending. The family and friends all sit with one another and just take in the sheer astounding amount of greatness in the room, as they all celebrate the rich culture that the Carmichaels are proud to be a part of. If that isn't an amazing cartoon example of exactly what Kwanzaa is about, then please explain to me what is, because I clearly fumbled in my research into this topic. Now, on top of getting praise for its accurate portrayal of Kwanzaa, Rugrats would get praise in general for bringing more attention to the holiday and the meaning behind it, as well as highlighting the importance of cultural awareness. The series was already known for showcasing multiple holiday specials, so the fact that they would go on to have a special for Kwanzaa as well does make sense, as it leans into their inclusive nature of appreciating that representation. This praise would come from not only critics, but also many others, including Aunt T's own voice actress, Irma P. Hall, who you might know from The Lady Killers, A Family Thing, or her role as Big Mama Joe in Soul Food. This episode was amazing for mindfully portraying Kwanzaa and putting the holiday in the spotlight for a moment. On top of that though, it would also be the episode that would land Susie's voice actress, Cree Summer, a nomination for an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Performance by a Youth at the 34th NAACP Image Awards. The award would end up going to LeVar Burton for his work on the amazing show Reading Rainbow. However, the fact that her role got her this nomination without a doubt spoke volumes to how great of an impact that this episode had, and how amazingly she as an actress portrayed the emotions behind her character. Furthermore, there was plenty of praise for Irma P. Hall and her energetic portrayal of Aunt T, and how great that played into Cree Summer's portrayal of Susie. Overall, from production of the episode and the voice acting down to the details of the Kwanzaa celebration, there was a lot of praise given to this episode. I mean, the Kinara, the Mkeka, the Unity Cup, they really leaned into the accuracy in a respectful way here. When it comes to what brought criticism to this episode, however, interestingly enough, it almost shouldn't have been completely aimed at the Rugrats specifically, or even Klasky Csupo, the studio that made the show. In all reality, at least a portion of the blame should have fallen on Nickelodeon. What's even more interesting about it is part of the reason why it was so controversial is a portion of why it was given praise to begin with. A while after this episode had premiered, it would fall under scrutiny by a British journalist by the name of David Rennie, who had written an article in 2003 mentioning that Rugrats contributed to the commercialization of Kwanzaa. The thing is though, he's not wrong by any means. When we look at the meaning behind Kwanzaa, it's a very different holiday. It's about celebrating African culture as well as embracing and empowering their communities. It's not meant to be a let's all go to Walmart and buy the kids toys kind of holiday. It's not supposed to be this big commercialized thing where you can go to retail stores and buy Kwanzaa gifts and decorations. However, come the 1990s, when Rugrats was dominating the cartoon world, a lot of money-hungry corporations were attempting to commercialize Kwanzaa for their own financial gain. In the face of a holiday meant to celebrate unity, self-determination, and cooperative economics, these big box stores selling Kwanzaa decorations would kind of contradict the entire point. Not to mention Hallmark putting out their first ever Kwanzaa card in 1992. It all falls directly in line with the typical trope of a holiday's core values being shrouded by consumerism. The material goods start to take the spotlight, and the true meaning behind the holiday is lost along the way. Of course, Rugrats didn't start this trend, however, they did play into it in a sense. Of course, the way they portrayed this was so mindful, and it was a great representation of what Kwanzaa is about, but we have to keep in mind that the true intention of this is to get eyes on the TV. This is about a large corporation who owns the rights to this network, which owns the rights to this show, making money from the people watching it, and seeing commercials every so often. Sure, if you can't see the glaring issue with that, then maybe you'll see the issue in them following it up with releasing a book version of this episode, as well as a home video version, so they could continue to make even more money off of the concept. One big thing that kind of led to me questioning all of this is a quote from Marjorie Cohn, the ex-VP of production at Nickelodeon. She's the one credited with identifying Rugrats as what she called the natural home for a Kwanzaa special because it already had multiple specials centered around other holidays. This admittedly has me feeling very mixed because here I was thinking that the team behind Rugrats had planned to feature all of this representation of different holidays when in all reality it sounds like they were potentially instructed to do so by their bosses at Nickelodeon. As it pertains to their bosses at Nickelodeon, Marjorie Cohn would go on to explain that the network included cultural diversity and representation in its programming to remain true to its commitment to being there for all kids. Now, this is fantastic in my opinion. If that's the whole truth, then yeah, of course, Nickelodeon wanting their shows to represent all nationalities and cultures that consume them sounds like it comes from a wholesome place. However, given the nature that this is a massive media company we're talking about and that their entire existence, especially in 2001 when this episode aired, was about making as big of a profit as possible, it's hard not to imagine some fat corporate bigwig with a cigar in his mouth telling Marjorie Cohn to pick a show to make a Kwanzaa episode so they can make more money off of more holidays. By all means, maybe that isn't the case, but ultimately, I see where David Rennie was coming from when he said that Rugrats played a part in commercializing Kwanzaa. A massive company putting a ton of eyes on a specific holiday has a high propensity for a ton of other companies to see that and decide that they're gonna hop on the bandwagon. With the heart and soul of Kwanzaa essentially being the opposite of Christmas and other commercialized holidays, it just kind of felt like it was a bit of a rough move. I will say, for me personally, I recognize that it's not my place to decide whether or not Rugrats making a Kwanzaa episode was ethically sound. I'm not the judge of anything here. I'm just some random white dude on the internet who has a ton of love and appreciation for culture. What I can say though is that for me personally, this episode was pretty fantastic for helping me learn about Kwanzaa for the first time. I will never forget the first time I saw this one when I was a kid. For me personally, there was one scene here that hit really close to home. That would be the part where Susie finishes doing Chucky's hair and they both look in the mirror and he says that they look like brother and sister, except she doesn't have as many freckles. This was just so cute and innocent, and I absolutely love it. This showcases the innocence of children and how to them, skin color isn't important. It's the quality of the human and the bond that you share that truly matters to them. It's yet another, albeit kind of subtle, display of representation. This reminds me of my childhood. Honestly, I try to keep my personal life off of the internet as much as possible, but I have a few older sisters that I grew up with. They have a different dad than I do, but that's always been something that I've seen as irrelevant ever since my early childhood. Now, the reason I bring it up though is because none of us look all that much alike. One of them is pale with red hair and a ton of freckles. One of them is black. And then there's me, the giraffe of the family. In all seriousness though, growing up, I never thought for a second about the fact that my sisters and I have completely different skin colors, because that was the last thing on my mind when we were playing together and spending time with one another. This short few second scene here brought me back to my childhood, and it put a huge smile on my face. It represents how being someone's brother or sister is so much more than just looking alike. Sharing the same exact genetics as someone is so much more than what's on the outside. On that note, I do have to share that I appreciate so much that Kwanzaa can be celebrated by anyone, regardless of skin color. This is even shown in this episode by how all of Susie's friends are invited over to celebrate. This home is open to all who are coming to celebrate the culture, partake in the unity, and help towards the greater good of the community. I absolutely love how inclusive of a holiday that it is, and the fact that it's welcome to anyone who wants to celebrate is something that I find a ton of value in. Moving along, another thing that I will never forget about this episode is the reference to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Charles stopping to help him with his car troubles. This right here was massive because it comes along with the implication that Susie's family played a big role in helping him get to Washington to deliver his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. The speech that would not only influence legislation, but would also inspire a global movement and become an overall cultural touchstone in American history. The impact of this speech was priceless, and the Rugrats portraying Charles and Aunt T playing a role in helping it happen shows people that you never know how one simple act of kindness could completely change the world. It really nails home the sentiment that some of the most important people in history never end up in the history books. If Charles hadn't shown up just in time to help, then history wouldn't have unfolded the way that it did, and Martin Luther King wouldn't have been there to give that compelling speech. This right here was just a perfect plot point to include, as it definitely adds some contextual relevance as well as a bit of history, but not enough to make this feel like a history lesson. If there's anything else that I want to touch on, it would be how awesome it is that Susie's family has such a wide variety of personalities, traits, and qualities. Edwin is the smart one who's very well spoken for such a young child. He's gonna grow up to become a scientist for sure, or maybe a doctor like his mom. Buster is the sporty one who also has a bit of a trickster side, as we've seen in the past. I can certainly see him going on to be an all-star athlete, or maybe an actor someday, or something along those lines. Elisa likes to be social and loves talking gossip. She can keep a conversation going for hours on end. I feel like she would be an excellent social media influencer or a YouTuber. And then we have Susie, who, even for such a young kid, is a jack of all trades. She's smart, she's sporty, she's charismatic, and she's authentic. I feel like Susie would make an excellent leader nearly anywhere she commits her future to. It makes me happy that the Carmichaels have such a wide variety of personalities. I mean, Phil and Lil are pretty much carbon copies of one another. Chucky and his dad are a spitting image of one another. And Angelica and her parents, I mean, come on. A lot of the families in this show are just really similar to each other within their family unit. The Carmichaels, on the other hand, all had vastly different qualities and talents. Sure, Susie may have been a spitting image of her mother when she was her age, but even then, she seems to be very different from her mom in a lot of ways. Now, I do have one final thing that I wasn't sure if I was gonna bring up or not, but honestly guys, while we're here talking about this episode, I might as well just throw it out there. Anyone else catch Randy talking about how funny it was that the dummy bears pitched a tent together? Aunt T ends up saying that this just goes to show how everyone finds different things funny, which ultimately rings very true to real life. This right here could be a direct reference to how some early Nicktoons, such as Rocko's Modern Life and Ren and Stimpy, had hidden innuendos throughout some of their episodes. Aunt T's mindset about it highlights the simple nature of how the children can find the zany antics funny, meanwhile the adults can laugh at the tent-pitching references, while the kids will be none the wiser. It did feel a bit on the nose though, the way they had Randy laughing about it, if I'm being honest. In conclusion, you guys, I can't stress enough, if this is your first time learning about the meaning behind Kwanzaa, I implore you to do some research because this episode just scratches the surface. It's another one of those where doing your own research on the topic can definitely open your eyes to the lessons to be learned a lot more than having school books or a teacher explain it to you back in the 90s. Personally, I admire the values behind Kwanzaa. I think having a dedicated week where we take time to celebrate African American culture and explore the traditional African communitarian values that the holiday is based upon is really a great thing as long as it's done in a respectful and mindful way that prioritizes building up the community and recognizing the greatness of it. Speaking directly to my friends out there who recognize and celebrate Kwanzaa, I hope that you have an amazing time with your families and friends, and of course, cherish that unity. Wishing all of you a joyous Kwanzaa. But what do you guys think? Do you have an opinion about the approach to this Kwanzaa special? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, massive shout out to my friends in the True 90s Kids tier on Patreon. You guys are the absolute best and I appreciate you all so much. I also want to give a quick shout out to Kat, my first ever member here on YouTube. I just recently launched memberships and thank you so much Kat for signing up. You're so cool and I appreciate you a ton, my friend. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and give a little praise to the algorithm in hopes that it pushes this one to everyone else. As always, thank you all so much for watching and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Peace.